You think you're paying attention right now to this room, to this moment, to what's around you. You think you notice things, and you do. But here's what most people don't realize. The version of events your conscious mind receives has already been edited, filtered, prioritized, shaped by processes that finish their work before your awareness even arrived. You didn't notice that editing happening. You never do. Because the editing is invisible. Because by the time you're aware of a thought, a feeling, a reaction, the decision about what to notice was already made. Most people go their entire lives never questioning that gap, never asking what happens in the space between the world and their experience of it. Smart people notice that space, not because they're faster, not because they're more intelligent in any measurable way, because they've learned to look for what most people don't think to look for. Tonight, that's what we're doing. Psychological influence is not dramatic. It doesn't look like a chess master making calculated moves. It doesn't feel like something being done to you. It feels like your own thinking, your own preferences, your own reactions, your own assessments of people and situations. That's what makes it so consistent, so reliable, so almost impossible to see from inside it. The most powerful influences on your daily behavior are not the obvious ones. They're not the advertising you notice and dismiss, not the rhetoric you recognize and resist. They're the subtle ones, the ones that arrive through channels you don't monitor: tone of voice, timing, the order in which information is presented, the emotional state you happen to be in when you first encountered a person, the experiences from years ago that are silently shaping what you expect today. None of this is happening to you. It's happening as you, as the experience of being yourself, thinking your thoughts, reaching your conclusions. And that is what makes noticing it both difficult and genuinely valuable. Today we're going through 5 patterns. Not to make you suspicious of everyone around you, not to give you techniques, but to show you what's already happening, so that you can begin to see it rather than simply be inside it. Let's begin. There's a version of yourself you carry, a self-image. The story of what kind of person you are, how you respond to things, what you value, how aware you are. Most people rate their self-awareness significantly higher than it actually is. This is not a harsh judgment. It's a documented, replicated finding. When researchers ask people to predict how they'll behave in a given situation, and then observe how they actually behave, the gap between prediction and reality is consistent, and consistent in a particular direction. People believe they're more rational than they are, more fair-minded, more immune to influence, more aware of their own biases than the evidence shows. The psychologist Timothy Wilson, who spent decades studying the unconscious mind, described it this way: there is far more happening in the mind than the conscious self has access to. The unconscious processes that govern attention, emotion, judgment, and behavior are not just background noise. They are the primary mechanism. Consciousness is not the driver. It is more like a passenger who occasionally believes it's steering. Think about the last time you formed a strong opinion about someone quickly, within seconds of meeting them. Within minutes of a first conversation, you had a clear sense of what kind of person they were, whether they were trustworthy, whether they were confident or insecure, whether you liked them. That assessment felt like observation, like you were reading the available information and reaching a reasonable conclusion. But what was actually happening was faster and less deliberate than that. Your brain was running pattern recognition at a speed conscious analysis cannot match, comparing this person to stored templates, generating a verdict, and delivering it to you as a feeling, as gut instinct, as the sense that you simply know something about this person. The feeling is real. The question is, what exactly produced it? How much of it was this person, and how much of it was every similar person you've encountered before? Most people never ask that question. They accept the feeling as data, act on it, and move on. The people who notice ask the question, not to override the feeling, but to know what they're working with. There's a difference between a reaction and an observation, and the first step towards psychological awareness is being able to tell them apart. Within the first few seconds of encountering someone, your brain has already formed a preliminary assessment. Trustworthy or not, dominant or deferential, warm or cold, confident or uncertain. Research by the social psychologist Nalini Ambady showed that judgments formed from very brief exposures, sometimes as short as a few seconds of silent video, correlate significantly with judgments formed after much longer observation. She called these thin slices of behavior, and they contain more information than most people realize. But here is the part most people miss. The first impression is not formed from a neutral scan. It is formed through a filter built from everything that came before this person. Every face, every voice, every posture that reminded your brain of something is part of that filter. Someone walks in with a particular kind of confidence, not aggressive, just settled, unhurried in their movement, specific in their eye contact, and you respond to it. With a slight deference you might not even notice, a slight adjustment in how you hold yourself, a slight tendency to give more weight to what they say. That response was not a decision. It was a reflex, built from thousands of encounters with people whose confidence was associated with authority, with competence, with safety, or with its opposite, depending on your specific history, and the reverse. Someone speaks with a slightly higher pitch when they're uncertain, a slight upward inflection at the end of statements, a small hedging quality in how they phrase things, and your confidence in what they say adjusts downward. Before you've evaluated the content of what they said, the signal is processed, the adjustment was made, and you move forward believing you were responding to what they said, when you were partly responding to how they said it. This is not a flaw in your perception. It is how perception works. The question is whether you know it's happening, because when you know, you can slow down. You can notice the adjustment. You can ask, am I responding to this person's ideas or to the packaging? That question asked at the right moment changes what you see. Segment 3, patterns you keep repeating more interior, reflective, personal. You have a pattern, probably more than one. Not the ones you've identified and are working on. The ones underneath those. The ones so embedded in your way of moving through the world that they don't feel like patterns. They feel like personality, like simply the way you are. In psychology, these are called schemas. Mental frameworks built from experience that organize how you interpret new information. You develop them early. In the first relationships where you learn what to expect from people, what safety felt like, what rejection felt like, what you needed to do to maintain connection, what happened when you expressed a need that wasn't met. Those early experiences generated templates, and those templates, still running, filter everything that comes after them. Here's how it looks in practice. You're in a relationship, things are going well, and then something shifts, a slight withdrawal, a shorter response, an afternoon of unusual silence, and something in you activates a familiar feeling, an urgency to fix something, to check in, to explain yourself, to do more. The feeling is disproportionate to the trigger. You know this somewhere, but the feeling is real and insistent. What's happening is the schema activating, the template recognizing a pattern that in its original context meant something significant, meant withdrawal, meant rejection, meant something was wrong, and responding as if the original meaning applies, even when this situation is entirely different. This is not weakness. It is the brain being faithful to its training, protecting you based on what it learned. But the protection isn't always accurate. The behavior it generates, the over-explaining, the withdrawing, the people-pleasing can create the very outcomes it was designed to prevent. Have you ever noticed yourself responding to a current situation with an intensity that seemed to belong to a different one? That intensity is the signal. Not that something is wrong with you, that a pattern is running, and once you can see a pattern running, you have something you didn't have before, a choice. You have a model of the people in your life, a mental representation of who they are, what they want, how they think. That model feels like perception, like you're simply seeing them accurately. But the model is not the person, it is a construction. Built from your observations, filtered through your expectations, shaped by your own internal states. The first mechanism is projection, the tendency to attribute to others the thoughts, feelings, and motives present in yourself. When you're feeling competitive, you read competitiveness in neutral behavior. When you're feeling insecure, you interpret a lack of response as judgment. The second is confirmation bias. Once an impression is formed, It filters what you see. The person you've decided is unreliable. Their moments of reliability go unregistered. The person you've decided is trustworthy. Their inconsistencies get reframed as exceptions. You're not being dishonest, you're being efficient. The brain maintains models and updates them slowly, which means you're often responding to your idea of a person rather than to the person themselves. The third is the fundamental attribution error. When someone behaves in a way that frustrates you, your first instinct is to attribute it to their character. They're rude, they're thoughtless, rather than to their situation. They're exhausted, they receive bad news, they're managing something invisible to you. Character attributions are fast and satisfying, but they're often partially wrong, missing the context that would change what you're seeing. What would it change if you assume the most charitable context first? Not naively, but as a deliberate interruption of the automatic attribution. The answer for most people who try it is that it changes more than expected. There is a moment most people never find. Not because it's hidden, because it's very small. And everything in ordinary experience is designed to move past it. It's the moment between stimulus and response, between something happening and your reaction to it, between the trigger and the behavior the trigger produces. In that moment, there is a space, a gap. And in that gap, if you've developed the capacity to find it, there is something that functions like choice. Viktor Frankl, writing from the experience of surviving Nazi concentration camps, described this as one of the last human freedoms. Between stimulus and response, he wrote, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. The people who operate in that gap don't look different from the outside.